The crystal glasses clinked with a delicate, pristine sound as I moved between the tables of Bellissimo, the most exclusive Italian restaurant in the city. The scent of truffle oil and aged Parmesan hung in the air, mingling with expensive perfumes and the subtle woody notes of men's cologne that cost more than my monthly rent. My feet ached in the mandatory black heels, practical enough for service, but elegant enough for the clientele who wouldn't tolerate anything less than perfection. "Table 7 needs another bottle of the Barolo." "Marco," the head server murmured as he passed, not bothering to look at me. I was invisible here, just another black uniform moving efficiently through the dimly lit space, existing solely to anticipate needs before they were voiced. I nodded, though he didn't see it, and made my way to the climate-controlled wine room. 8 months at Bellissimo, and I still felt like an imposter. The other servers moved with an innate confidence that came from belonging in spaces like this. I was just Ellie Bennett, 26, with student loans that seemed to grow despite my payments, and a talent for remembering wine pairings that had landed me this job I desperately needed. The weight of fatigue pressed against my shoulders as I carefully extracted the requested bottle. A double shift today after covering for Sophia last night. The tips were worth it. They had to be. But exhaustion had settled deep in my bones, making my movements slower, my smile a bit more forced. I was so focused on not dropping the $400 bottle of wine that I didn't notice the shift in the restaurant's atmosphere until I emerged from the wine room. It was subtle. The slight lowering of conversations, the straightening of waitstaff postures, the almost imperceptible increase in tension. That's when I saw him. He hadn't been there when I'd gone to fetch the wine. Table 12, the most private corner booth, had been empty all evening, reserved but unoccupied. Now 4 men sat there, but only one commanded attention. He wore a charcoal gray suit that looked as though it had been poured onto his frame, the kind of tailoring that didn't just suggest money, but whispered of power. Dark hair, precisely cut, not a strand out of place. From this distance, I couldn't make out his features clearly, but I could feel the weight of his presence across the room. 2 of the men with him were clearly security, their alert posture and scanning eyes giving them away despite their expensive suits. The third leaned in, speaking rapidly in hushed tones. "That's him," I heard one of the busboys whisper as he passed. I didn't need to ask who him was. Even in my short time at Bellissimo, I'd heard the whispers. Alessio Vitale, 33 years old and allegedly controlled half the city's underground operations, though nothing had ever been proven. Old money mixed with new ventures, some legitimate, others spoken of only in whispers. He owned numerous businesses across the city, including, rumor had it, a significant stake in Bellissimo itself. "Ellie!" Marco's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. "Table 7 is waiting." I hurried to deliver the wine, hyper-aware of the corner booth even with my back turned to it. The prickling sensation of being watched raised goosebumps along my arms, though I told myself it was just the restaurant's overactive air conditioning. 2 hours passed in a blur of orders, plates, and the practiced smile that made my cheeks ache. I moved on autopilot, my mind drifting to tomorrow's schedule and whether I could pick up an extra shift to cover the unexpected plumbing bill from last week. Table 12 remained occupied, though I wasn't assigned to it. Those tables were reserved for Marco and the senior staff. Still, I couldn't help stealing glances when I thought no one would notice. Once, I caught a glimpse of his profile. Strong jawline, straight nose, unexpectedly long eyelashes. Then his head turned slightly, and I jerked my gaze away, heart hammering as though I'd been caught trespassing. It was nearly midnight when the restaurant began to empty. My section was clear, and I was wiping down the last table when Marco appeared at my elbow. "Take this to table 12, he said, pressing a leather folder into my hands. Inside was a check with a figure that made my eyes widen. "But that's your table," I said, confused. Marco never relinquished his high-tipping tables. His expression was unreadable. "Mr. Vitale asked for you specifically." The folder felt suddenly heavy in my hands. "Me? But I haven't even—" "Just do it, Ellie." Marco cut me off, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. My pulse quickened as I made my way across the now quiet restaurant. 2 of the men had left, leaving only Vitale and 1 guard. As I approached, I could feel my professional mask slipping, revealing the exhaustion underneath. I placed the folder on the table with hands I was proud didn't shake. "Your check, sir." That's when I saw him clearly for the first time. His eyes were dark, not merely brown, but a depth of color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His features were striking rather than conventionally handsome, too intense, too commanding. A face accustomed to being obeyed. Those eyes flicked up to mine, and the air seemed to vanish from the room. Recognition flickered there. Though I was certain we'd never met, I would have remembered. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and smooth, with just a hint of an Italian accent beneath cultured English. I took a step back, ready to retreat, when he opened the folder. With practiced efficiency, he extracted several large bills, placed them inside, and closed it again. As he did, something glinted on his right hand, a heavy gold signet ring with an intricate crest I couldn't make out. "Have a good evening," I managed, taking the folder and backing away, disturbed by how his gaze seemed to see straight through my carefully constructed professional veneer. I returned to the staff area, heart still racing, and opened the folder to process the payment. The tip was astronomical, enough to cover my overdue electric bill and then some. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by an inexplicable unease. Why me? Why that amount? I finished my closing duties quickly, eager to escape the lingering sensation of those dark eyes. The night air was cool against my flushed skin as I stepped out the employee exit into the alley behind the restaurant. Most of the staff parked in the small lot adjacent to the building, but my ancient Honda was in the shop again. Another expense I couldn't afford. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. Pulling my thin jacket tighter around me, I started walking, my mind still puzzling over the encounter. I was so distracted I almost missed it. The small, heavy object my fingers encountered in the folder I was still clutching. I stopped under a streetlight and opened the folder again. There, nestled against the bills, was a ring. The same gold signet ring I'd seen on his finger. My breath caught as I lifted it, feeling its substantial weight. The crest was clear now. A stylized lion with something clutched in its paws. Panic flared. Had it fallen off? Had he left it by mistake? Either way, having it in my possession felt dangerous, like holding a live grenade. I turned back toward the restaurant, my tired body protesting, but my mind made up. I couldn't keep this, and I certainly couldn't wait until tomorrow to return it. If it was valuable, and it clearly was, he might think I'd stolen it. The main entrance to Bellissimo was dark now, the last customers gone. I hurried around to the side entrance where expensive cars still lined the private lot. My heart sank when I didn't see any that matched what a man like Vitale might drive. But then I spotted it. A sleek black Bentley with a driver standing beside it. Beyond, another man I recognized as the security guard from earlier stood smoking. Drawing a deep breath, I approached. The driver noticed me first, his posture shifting subtly into alertness. The guard dropped his cigarette, crushing it beneath a polished shoe. "Excuse me," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I need to return something to Mr. Vitale." He left it at his table. The guard's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Vitale doesn't forget things." I held up the ring, its gold catching the streetlight. This was in the check folder. Something passed between the two men. A look I couldn't interpret. Then the guard nodded once and moved toward the car's rear door. It opened before he reached it, and Alessio Vitale emerged, his tall frame unfolding gracefully. He didn't seem surprised to see me standing there, shivering slightly in the night air. "Ms. Bennett," he said. And the fact that he knew my name sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I extended my hand, the ring resting on my palm. "You left this, sir. I thought you'd want it back immediately." He made no move to take it, his expression unreadable as he studied my face. "Did I?" he asked softly. Confusion swept through me. It was in the check folder. I assumed it fell off, or... I trailed off, suddenly uncertain. A small smile curved his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing happens by accident in my world, Ms. Bennett." His words hung in the air between us, as understanding slowly dawned. He hadn't forgotten the ring. He had left it deliberately. But why? "I don't understand," I said, my arm still outstretched. the ring feeling heavier by the second. He moved toward me then, his steps measured and deliberate. I fought the urge to back away as he stopped just before me, close enough that I could smell the subtle notes of his cologne, something expensive and custom-made, with hints of cedar and spice. "It's quite simple," he said, taking the ring from my palm. His fingers brushed against mine, the contact brief, but electric. "I wanted to meet you. Properly." I stared at him, at a complete loss for words. He slipped the ring back onto his finger with practiced ease. "Why?" I finally managed. That smile again, cryptic and calculating. "You're different from the others there. You watch. You notice things." He tilted his head slightly. "You noticed me." "Everyone notices you," I countered without thinking, then immediately regretted my boldness. But he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his severe features. "Perhaps, but not the way you do." He glanced at his watch, an understated piece that probably cost more than my yearly salary. "It's late. My driver will take you home." It wasn't a request. The car door stood open, waiting. "That's not necessary," I protested. "I take the bus." "At this hour?" His expression hardened. "Absolutely not." Fear and indignation warred within me. "I do it every night." "Not anymore," he said simply, as if rewriting my life was within his power. And perhaps it was. Before I could form another objection, he reached into his pocket and extracted a business card. "Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. He pressed the card into my hand. "I'll send a car." "I'm working tomorrow," I said weakly, knowing even as I spoke that it wouldn't matter. "No," he replied. "You're not." With that, he gestured to the open car door, making it clear our conversation was over. Exhaustion and confusion winning over pride, I slid into the Bentley's plush leather interior, my mind reeling. As the door closed beside me, I looked down at the business card in my trembling fingers. It contained only his name and a phone number, embossed in simple black text against heavy cream stock. The driver slid into his seat, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Address?" he asked quietly. I gave it to him, still clutching the card, still trying to process what had just happened. As the car pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of Alessio Vitale watching me leave, his expression inscrutable, the signet ring once again gleaming on his finger like a silent promise, or a warning. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned in my small apartment, replaying the encounter with Alessio Vitale in my mind. His card sat on my nightstand, the embossed letters catching the faint glow of streetlights filtering through my thin curtains. I hadn't called the number. I wouldn't call the number. Whatever game he was playing, I wanted no part of it. By morning, exhaustion had settled over me like a heavy blanket. But my resolve was firm. I would go to work as usual. I would explain to Marco that last night had been some bizarre misunderstanding. Life would return to normal. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. I was halfway through my morning coffee when my phone rang. It was Marco. "Don't come in today," he said without preamble, his voice tight. My stomach dropped. "Are you firing me?" A pause. "No. You've been requested elsewhere." The way he said requested sent a chill through me. "Marco, I don't know what's going on, but I didn't ask for—" "Ellie," he cut me off, lowering his voice. "Listen to me. When Alessio Vitale shows interest in something, it becomes his. That's just how it works in this city. I don't know what you did to catch his eye, but my advice? Don't fight it." The call ended before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. My hands trembled slightly as I set it down, angry tears threatening to spill. Who did Vitale think he was, rearranging my life without my consent? And what exactly did showing interest entail? I spent the day in a state of nervous agitation, alternating between defiance and fear. By late afternoon, I'd convinced myself I would not be going to whatever meeting Vitale had arranged. I would not get into another one of his cars. I would not become some plaything for a dangerous man, regardless of how powerful he was. At precisely 7:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Car arriving in 15 minutes. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. How had he gotten my number? I hadn't given it to him or his driver. The invasion of privacy felt like a physical violation, leaving me breathless with indignation. At 7:45, I peered through my window to see a sleek black car idling at the curb. Not the Bentley from last night, but an equally expensive Mercedes with tinted windows. I stepped back, my previous resolve wavering. What would happen if I simply didn't go down? My phone buzzed again. "Ms. Bennett, I'm waiting downstairs. Mr. Vitale doesn't appreciate tardiness." The implied threat in those simple words made my decision for me. Refusing might bring more trouble than complying, at least for now. I could always leave if things became uncomfortable. With shaking hands, I changed into the nicest dress I owned, a simple navy blue sheath that was my go-to for job interviews. I applied minimal makeup, pulled my chestnut hair into a neat ponytail, and grabbed my coat. Whatever Vitale wanted, I would hear him out, politely decline, and put this strange interlude behind me. The driver was standing beside the car when I emerged from my building. He was a different man from last night, younger, with close-cropped hair and the alert posture of ex-military. He opened the door without a word, his expression professionally blank. "Where are we going?" I asked as I slid into the back seat. "Mr. Vitale's residence," he replied, closing the door with a soft thud that felt oddly final. The drive took us out of my modest neighborhood and toward the city's north side, where old money lived in sprawling estates, hidden behind ornate gates and mature trees. I watched through the window as the scenery changed, becoming progressively more exclusive, more removed from the world I knew. We eventually turned onto a private road that wound through meticulously landscaped grounds. Security cameras tracked our progress, and I glimpsed men stationed discreetly among the trees. More guards. The house, when it finally came into view, wasn't the ostentatious mansion I'd expected, but a modern architectural masterpiece of glass, stone, and clean lines that somehow managed to look both inviting and impenetrable. The car stopped at the main entrance, where a woman in a simple black dress waited. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her posture ramrod straight. "Ms. Bennett," she greeted me as the driver opened my door. "I'm Mrs. Russo, Mr. Vitale's housekeeper. Please, follow me." I followed her through massive wooden doors into a soaring entryway. The interior was a study in restrained luxury, expensive but not showy, with an emphasis on craftsmanship rather than ostentation. Original artwork hung on the walls, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a design museum. "Mr. Vitale will join you shortly," Mrs. Russo said, leading me to a sitting room overlooking an illuminated garden. "May I get you something to drink while you wait?" "Just water, please," I replied, my mouth suddenly dry. She nodded and disappeared, leaving me alone with my mounting anxiety. I perched on the edge of a leather chair, too tense to appreciate its comfort, and tried to steady my breathing. The water arrived, delivered by a young man in discreet livery, but Vitale didn't appear. 10 minutes stretched to 20, and I recognized the power play for what it was, making me wait, establishing dominance. My initial nervousness gave way to irritation. If this was how he treated all his interests, it was no wonder he had to resort to such manipulative tactics. I was considering walking out when the door finally opened. Alessio Vitale entered with the confident grace of someone who owned not just the room, but everything and everyone in it. He'd exchanged last night's formal suit for more casual attire, dark trousers and a light gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. The signet ring gleamed on his right hand. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his dark eyes assessing me. "Thank you for coming." I stood, determined to maintain whatever small advantage height might give me. Did I have a choice? A smile flickered across his face. "There are always choices. You chose to return my ring last night instead of keeping it or pawning it. You chose to get into my car this evening, after your driver implied there would be consequences if I didn't," I countered. His expression hardened slightly. "Paolo can be overzealous in his duties. I apologize if you felt threatened." The apology surprised me, though it didn't sound entirely sincere. I remained silent, waiting for him to explain why I was here. He gestured to the chair I'd vacated. "Please, sit. Have you eaten?" "I'm not hungry," I said, though it was a lie. I hadn't had an appetite all day. He ignored this, pressing a button on a discreet panel in the wall. Mrs. Russo, we'll take dinner now. Before I could protest again, he took the seat opposite mine, studying me with those unsettling dark eyes. Up close, I could see flecks of amber in them, warming what otherwise might have been a cold gaze. You're wondering why you're here, he said finally, among other things. What else are you wondering, Ellie? The casual use of my first name felt like another boundary crossed without permission. Why me? How you got my phone number? What exactly you think is happening here? He leaned back, seeming almost amused by my directness. I have access to considerable information when I want it. As for why you... He paused, considering. You're different. Genuine. In my world, that's rare. And therefore valuable. I'm not for sale, I said sharply. His expression darkened. I never suggested you were. Don't mistake my interest for something crude. The door opened, sparing me from having to respond. 2 staff members entered with trays, setting up an elegant meal on the table by the window. The aroma of expertly prepared food made my empty stomach clench. Join me, Vitale said when they'd gone, moving to the table. It wasn't a request. I hesitated, then reluctantly took the seat across from him. The food, some kind of delicate pasta with seafood, looked and smelled incredible. You work too hard, he said conversationally, as he poured wine into crystal glasses. 60 hours last week, I believe. Double shifts. Always the last to leave. The fact that he knew my schedule sent another wave of unease through me. I need the money. Student loans, he nodded. Art history and business, correct? An interesting combination. My fork clattered against the plate. Have you been investigating me? I like to know who I'm dealing with. He took a sip of wine, watching me over the rim of his glass. You're talented, Ellie. Wasted at Bellissimo. It pays the bills, I said defensively. Barely. He set his glass down with precision. I have a proposition for you. There it was. I steeled myself for whatever inappropriate offer was coming. I'm not interested in being your mistress, Mr. Vitale. For a moment, he looked genuinely startled. Then he laughed, a rich, warm sound that transformed his severe features. Is that what you think this is about? Heat rushed to my face. I don't know what this is about. That's the problem. He studied me, his expression becoming serious again. I want to offer you a job. I have a job. As I said, one that wastes your talents. He gestured around the room. I collect art. My collection has grown unwieldy. I need someone with knowledge and aesthetic sense to catalog it properly, perhaps suggest new acquisitions. The position includes an apartment on the grounds and a salary that would clear your student debt within a year. I stared at him, caught completely off guard. Of all the things I'd expected, a legitimate job offer wasn't one of them. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Why would you offer something like that to a complete stranger? You're not a complete stranger. I've been observing you for some time. The admission sent a shiver down my spine. That's not reassuring. He shrugged, unapologetic. I make it my business to identify talent. You have an eye for detail. You notice things others miss. Your senior thesis on Renaissance symbolism in modern corporate branding was particularly insightful. My thesis. He'd read my thesis. The violation of privacy was breathtaking. So this is a business proposition, I said carefully, nothing more. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or something darker. Would it disappoint you if it were? No, I said too quickly. It would be a relief. Then consider yourself relieved. He picked up his fork and began eating. The matter apparently settled in his mind. The position is yours if you want it. Take a few days to decide. I should have felt reassured. Instead, doubt crept in. Why go to such lengths for an art cataloger? He could have hired a professional with a single phone call. There had to be more to it. We ate in silence for several minutes. The tension between us almost palpable. Despite my suspicions, the food was too good to resist, and I realized how hungry I'd been. Your father was an artist, he said suddenly. Before the accident, I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. My father was a subject I rarely discussed. The pain of his loss, still raw, even after 8 years. How could you possibly know that? As I said, I make it my business to know things. His tone was matter of fact, but his eyes held something that might have been sympathy. His work was promising, derivative of Hopper, but with a distinctive voice emerging in his later pieces. Anger flared in me, hot and sudden. "Don't talk about him. You didn't know him." "No," Vitali agreed quietly, "but I own 3 of his paintings." The shock of this statement momentarily robbed me of speech. My father had sold very little during his lifetime, his work gaining recognition only after his death. The idea that this man, this stranger, possessed pieces of my father's legacy felt like another invasion. "I'd like to see them," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Something shifted in Vitali's expression. Satisfaction, perhaps. "Of course. They're in my private gallery. I'll show you after dinner." I nodded, suddenly eager to see my father's work again, to feel that connection. It was the first genuine emotion I'd experienced since entering this house that wasn't fear or anger. The remainder of the meal passed in less strained silence. When we finished, Vitali led me through the house to a secured wing. He placed his palm against a scanner, and heavy doors slid open to reveal a gallery worthy of a small museum. "My collection," he said simply, allowing me to enter first. I stepped inside, momentarily forgetting my suspicions as I took in the space. Paintings and sculptures were arranged with care and knowledge, the lighting perfect, the climate control evident in the room's consistent temperature. It was the work of someone who truly appreciated art, not just its monetary value. "This is incredible," I admitted, moving slowly from piece to piece. I recognized works by both established masters and emerging talents, all displayed with equal reverence. "Your father's pieces are here," Vitali said, guiding me to a wall where 3 canvases hung. My breath caught as I recognized my father's distinctive style. Urban landscapes with solitary figures, rendered in muted colors with strategic bursts of vibrancy. These were from his final period, when illness had already begun to affect his mobility, but before the accident that took his life. "How did you get these?" I asked, reaching out to almost touch the familiar signature in the corner. "Art auctions, private sales." He stood close behind me, his voice low. I could have chosen any pieces, but these spoke to me. I turned to find him watching me, his expression unreadable in the gallery's soft lighting. We were standing closer than I'd realized, close enough that I could smell that distinctive cologne again, could see the slight imperfection of a small scar near his left eyebrow. "Why am I really here, Mr. Vitali?" I asked quietly. He considered me for a long moment, his dark eyes searching mine. "Because when I want something, Ellie, I pursue it until it's mine." The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened me. Instead, it sent an unexpected thrill through my body, a reaction I immediately tried to suppress. "People aren't possessions," I said, taking a deliberate step back. "No," he agreed. "They're far more complex, more challenging." His eyes never left mine, more rewarding when they choose to stay of their own accord. The implication hung in the air between us, that this elaborate evening, the job offer, even acquiring my father's artwork, had all been steps in a campaign to... What? Seduce me? Own me? "I should go," I said, suddenly needing distance, air, time to think. He nodded once, accepting my retreat with surprising grace. "The driver will take you home whenever you're ready." As we walked back through the gallery, I found myself pausing at a familiar shape, partially covered by a cloth in the corner. Without thinking, I lifted the edge of the fabric. It was my father's final piece, the one he'd been working on when he died, the one I thought had been destroyed in the studio fire. I turned to Vitali, questions flooding my mind, but the expression on his face stopped me cold. In that unguarded moment, he looked hungry, triumphant, as if I'd sprung a trap he'd meticulously laid. "How did you get this?" I whispered. His smile was slow, satisfied. "I told you, Ellie. When I want something, I find a way to make it mine." The ride home passed in a blur. I sat rigid in the back seat of the Mercedes, my mind racing, trying to process what I'd seen. My father's final painting, the one I'd mourned, the one that represented his last creative expression, somehow in Alessio Vitali's possession. The implications were staggering. "We've arrived, Ms. Bennett," the driver announced, breaking my reverie. I stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk in front of my apartment building, the contrast between Vitali's world and mine never more apparent. The Mercedes waited until I'd entered the security door, a courtesy that felt more like surveillance. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto my worn couch, exhaustion finally catching up with me. I should have been planning my escape, looking up bus tickets to my mother's place in Oregon, or calling my friend Sarah in Chicago. Instead, I found myself replaying every moment with Vitale, searching for clues I might have missed. The painting changed everything. It wasn't just about me anymore. If Vitale had somehow acquired my father's final work, a piece that had supposedly been destroyed, what else did he know? What else might he have? Sleep evaded me again that night. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't run. Not yet. I needed answers first, and running would only ensure I never got them. My phone chimed with a text as I was making coffee. Your position remains open. Car will arrive at 9 a.m. if you're interested. AV. The presumption should have angered me. Instead, I found myself checking the time. 7:30 a.m. Enough to shower, dress, and prepare for whatever game Vitale was playing. At precisely 9 a.m., a black car pulled up outside. Different from yesterday's, an Audi this time, but with the same air of sleek menace. The same driver, Paolo, stood waiting as I emerged from my building. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett," he said, his tone neutral as he opened the door. "Mr. Vitale is pleased you've accepted his offer. I haven't accepted anything yet," I corrected, sliding into the back seat. "I have questions first." Paolo nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. The drive to Vitale's estate seemed shorter this morning, the route already becoming familiar. Dangerous. How quickly the extraordinary could become routine. Mrs. Russo met me at the door again, her expression as impassive as yesterday. "Mr. Vitale is in his study. He's expecting you." She led me through the house, past the sitting room where we'd dined last night, down a corridor lined with more artwork, each piece museum quality, each perfectly lit and displayed. We stopped before a heavy wooden door, which Mrs. Russo opened without knocking. "Ms. Bennett, sir." Alessio Vitale sat behind a massive desk of dark wood, papers spread before him. He wore a crisp white shirt, open at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. The signet ring gleamed on his right hand as he looked up, his dark eyes finding mine immediately. "Ellie," he said, rising, "please come in." Mrs. Russo withdrew, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Vitale gestured to a chair across from his desk, but I remained standing. "The painting," I said without preamble. "My father's last piece. You told me you acquired your collection through auctions and private sales. But that's impossible. That painting was destroyed in the studio fire." I saw the ashes myself. Something like respect flickered across his face at my directness. "Not everything was destroyed in that fire." "Then how did you get it?" He studied me for a moment, then moved from behind the desk, leaning against its edge. The casual posture did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. "Your father had a buyer lined up before the accident. The painting had already been moved to a secure location." I shook my head. "That's not possible. He would have told me." "Would he?" Vitale's gaze was penetrating. "Did your father tell you everything about his business dealings, Ellie? About the debts he had accumulated?" The question hit like a physical blow. My father had struggled financially, I knew that much, but he'd always protected me from the details. "What debts?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Vitale pushed away from the desk, moving to a cabinet against the wall. He extracted a file and returned, holding it out to me. "Perhaps you should see for yourself." I took the file with trembling hands and opened it to find loan documents, threatening letters from creditors, and finally, a contract for the sale of several paintings, including the final piece, to a holding company I didn't recognize. "Argent Acquisitions," I read aloud. "Is that one of yours?" He nodded once. "A subsidiary that handles certain private transactions." I closed the file, a chill settling over me. "So you've been watching me since my father died? Planning what exactly?" "Not since he died, no." Vitale's expression remained neutral. "Our paths crossed more recently. I recognized your name from the acquisition records when you started working at Bellissimo. And that's when you decided to..." "What?" Collect me like one of your paintings? The anger in my voice surprised even me. His eyes darkened. I don't collect people, Ellie. Then what do you call this? I gestured around us. The job offer, the car, knowing everything about me, my schedule, my thesis, my father's debts. I call it interest. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. When something captures my attention, I learn everything about it. It's both a business strategy and a personal trait. And what happens when you lose interest? I challenged, refusing to back away despite his proximity. Something dangerous flickered across his face. I rarely do. The implication hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities I wasn't ready to examine. I changed tack. The job offer. Is it real? Completely. He seemed almost relieved by the shift to business. My collection needs proper management and you're qualified. The terms I mentioned last night stand. Competitive salary, accommodations on the grounds. I considered this, weighing my options. Taking the job would give me access to my father's painting, perhaps answers to questions I hadn't even formulated yet. It would also place me firmly in Vitale's orbit. A prospect both terrifying and, if I was honest with myself, intriguing. If I accept, I said carefully, there would be conditions. His eyebrow arched. You're negotiating? I'm establishing boundaries, I corrected. The job would be strictly professional. I'd want everything in writing. Salary, hours, responsibilities. And I'd want unrestricted access to my father's paintings. Vitale watched me with what might have been amusement. Anything else? I'd keep my apartment. I don't need to live here. At this, his expression hardened slightly. Non-negotiable. The collection is valuable, and security is paramount. Living on site is part of the position. I hesitated, sensing this was a battle I wouldn't win. I'd need access to my apartment to collect belongings, check mail. Easily arranged. He studied me for a moment. Are those all your conditions? For now, I said, unwilling to concede completely. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his severe features, making him look younger, almost approachable. I accept your terms. When can you start? The speed with which he agreed made me suspicious. Don't you need time to prepare a contract? He reached behind him and extracted a folder from his desk. Already prepared. Review it at your leisure. Of course he had it ready. Of course he'd anticipated my acceptance. I took the folder, unsure whether to be impressed or unnerved by his confidence. I'll start after I've reviewed this and we've signed a final version, I said, clutching the folder like a shield. Perfect. He moved to the door, opening it with a fluid motion. In the meantime, Mrs. Russo will show you the apartment and give you a tour of the grounds. I have meetings this morning, but I'll join you for lunch. The dismissal was clear, yet oddly courteous. Before I could respond, Mrs. Russo appeared as if summoned by some silent signal. Vitale's hand brushed mine as he ushered me toward the doorway, a fleeting contact that sent an unexpected jolt through my body. Welcome to the team, Ellie, he said softly, his eyes holding mine for a moment too long before he turned back to his desk. Mrs. Russo led me through the house to a separate wing, explaining the layout as we went. The apartment turned out to be a luxurious suite of rooms. Bedroom, bathroom, sitting area, and a small kitchenette, decorated in muted tones with the same understated elegance as the rest of the house. Mr. Vitale had these renovated last month, she explained, watching as I took in the space. Previously, they were guest quarters. Last month, before he'd even approached me at the restaurant. More evidence of his meticulous planning. The main gallery is accessible through that door, she continued, indicating a heavy wooden door with a digital lock. You'll be given the access codes once the employment agreement is finalized. I nodded, moving to the windows that overlooked an immaculate garden. The ground stretched before me, the perimeter marked by a high stone wall with security cameras visible at regular intervals. Beautiful, but isolated. A gilded cage. Mr. Vitale values his privacy, Mrs. Russo said, noting my gaze. And his security. I'm sure he does, I murmured. She led me on a tour of the rest of the house. Those parts I was permitted to see, at least. The main gallery I'd visited last night. A smaller, more intimate gallery adjacent to it. The kitchen, a formal dining room, a library stocked with rare volumes. Everywhere, evidence of wealth wielded with taste rather than ostentation. The West Wing is Mr. Vitale's private residence, Mrs. Russo explained as we passed a corridor guarded by a discreet security system. Access is restricted. I wondered what secrets lay behind those secured doors. What aspects of Alessio Vitale's life remained hidden from view? The man himself was a collection of contradictions. Cultured art collector and rumored criminal, intimidating presence, an unexpectedly considerate host. By the time we returned to the main part of the house, it was approaching noon. Mrs. Russo showed me to a sun-drenched conservatory, where a light lunch had been laid out. "Mr. Vitale will join you shortly," she said, withdrawing with the same quiet efficiency that seemed to characterize everyone in his employ. Left alone, I opened the contract folder and began reading. The terms were generous, more than generous, with a salary triple what I made at Bellissimo, health benefits, and even a clothing allowance, appropriate to the position. My duties were clearly outlined: cataloging the collection, researching potential acquisitions, arranging conservation work as needed, and hosting occasional private viewings for selected guests. Nothing inappropriate, nothing suspicious. If anything, the contract was more formal and professional than I'd expected, with none of the hidden clauses or traps I'd feared. I was still reading when I felt his presence. Alessio Vitale stood in the doorway, watching me with those intent dark eyes. How long he'd been there, I couldn't say. "Any concerns with the terms?" he asked, moving into the room with that fluid grace that seemed effortless. "It's very generous," I admitted. "It reflects the value I place on the position." He took the seat across from me, and on the right candidate. 2 weeks passed in a surreal blur. I signed the contract after my lawyer friend reviewed it, finding nothing concerning in the language. I gave notice at Bellissimo, packed my essentials, and moved into the suite at Vitale's estate. The transition happened with unsettling smoothness, as if my life had been carefully choreographed toward this moment. The work itself was fascinating. Vitale's collection was even more extensive than I'd initially realized. Paintings, sculptures, rare books, and artifacts from around the world, each piece more exquisite than the last. I spent my days cataloging, researching provenance, and organizing the collection into a proper digital database. The work absorbed me completely, allowing me to temporarily forget the strange circumstances that had brought me here. Vitale himself remained an enigma. Some days he was absent entirely, attending to his numerous business interests. Other days he would appear in the gallery while I worked, observing silently before engaging me in surprisingly insightful conversations about art history or conservation techniques. He was unfailingly polite, maintaining a professional distance that both relieved and strangely disappointed me. I spent hours with my father's paintings, especially the final piece, a cityscape at dawn, with a solitary figure standing at a crossroads, face turned away from the viewer. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but the execution was masterful. I often found myself wondering what he would think of my current situation, working for a man who collected his art, and it seemed had now collected his daughter. It was during the 3rd week that the careful balance shifted. I was working late in the main gallery, finalizing entries for a collection of Renaissance miniatures, when Vitale appeared. He'd been gone for 2 days on a business trip, and I hadn't expected him back until morning. "You should rest," he said, his voice startling me in the quiet room. I looked up from my laptop to find him watching me with that intense gaze that seemed to see straight through my carefully maintained composure. "I wanted to finish this section," I explained, suddenly aware of the late hour and my disheveled appearance. I'd pulled my hair into a messy bun hours ago and had abandoned my blazer over a nearby chair. He moved closer, studying the miniatures I'd been cataloging. These were my mother's favorites. It was the first personal detail he'd shared, and it caught me off guard. "They're beautiful," I said, glancing at the tiny portraits housed in their ornate frames. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary." She used to tell me they contained whole worlds if you looked closely enough. A shadow passed over his face. "She died when I was 12. "I'm sorry," I said softly, recognizing the lingering pain in his voice. It echoed my own loss. He shrugged. the gesture incongruously casual for a man usually so controlled. It was a long time ago. Some losses never really fade, I said, thinking of my father. His eyes found mine, something like recognition flickering in their dark depths. No, they don't. The moment stretched between us, a fragile connection I hadn't anticipated. He broke it first, glancing at his watch. It's past midnight. I'll walk you to your rooms. I saved my work and closed the laptop, oddly reluctant to end the conversation. As I gathered my things, I noticed he seemed different tonight. His usual imposing presence tempered by something I couldn't quite identify. Fatigue, perhaps, or some lingering effect of whatever business had taken him away. We walked in companionable silence through the quiet house, our footsteps muffled by thick carpets. When we reached my door, he hesitated. There's an exhibition opening tomorrow evening at the Renwick Gallery, he said. Contemporary Italian artists. Would you like to attend? Professionally speaking, of course. The qualifier seemed added as an afterthought, acknowledgement of the boundaries I'd established. Still, the invitation felt significant, the first time he'd suggested we leave the estate together. I'd like that, I said, surprised by my own eagerness. He nodded, seeming pleased. The car will be ready at 7. Alessio, I said, using his first name without thinking. Thank you. For the job. For access to my father's work. Whatever your reasons, I appreciate it. Something shifted in his expression, a softening perhaps, or a glimpse of genuine emotion beneath the controlled exterior. Without warning, he reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers brushing my cheek in a touch so light I might have imagined it. Sleep well, Ellie, he said, his voice low, before turning and walking away down the corridor. I stood frozen at my door, heart racing from that simple contact. As I prepared for bed, I tried to rationalize my reaction. It had been a long day. I was tired. I was lonely. It meant nothing. But in the darkness of my room, as sleep finally claimed me, I couldn't deny the truth. Alessio Vitale, enigmatic, dangerous, possibly criminal, had somehow breached the careful defenses I'd built around my heart. The gallery opening was unlike any event I'd previously attended. The Renwick was transformed, its austere spaces softened by strategic lighting and floral arrangements. The guest list was carefully curated: wealthy collectors, museum directors, art critics, and a handful of the featured artists. I wore a black dress I'd found hanging in my closet that morning, designer, perfectly tailored, with a handwritten note. For tonight. The presumption should have angered me. Instead, I found myself appreciating his eye for detail as I slipped into the silk garment that fit as if made for me. It probably had been. Alessio arrived at my door precisely at 7, immaculate in a tailored suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. His eyes darkened appreciatively as they took in my appearance. You look beautiful, he said simply. The dress is lovely, I replied, deflecting the compliment. Thank you. The dress is merely a canvas, he countered, offering his arm. You're the masterpiece. The line was smooth, too smooth, and yet I found myself fighting a blush as I took his arm. His charm was a weapon, I reminded myself, one wielded with expert precision. The evening passed in a glittering haze. Alessio guided me through the exhibition, his hand a constant presence at the small of my back. He introduced me to important contacts with a proprietary air that both irritated and thrilled me. Ellie is managing my collection now, he would say, his tone casual but his eyes watchful, gauging reactions. She has an exceptional eye. The responses were uniformly respectful, though I caught speculative glances between several guests. I realized how this looked, the notorious Alessio Vitale and his new, much younger companion. The power dynamic was obvious to any observer, regardless of the professional nature of our relationship. They think I'm your latest acquisition, I murmured after one such introduction, unable to keep the edge from my voice. His expression didn't change, but his hand pressed more firmly against my back. What they think is irrelevant, is it? I challenged, turning to face him fully. What exactly is happening here, Alessio? His eyes held mine, unreadable in the gallery's dim lighting. We're attending an exhibition. You're representing my collection. And the dress? The way you're introducing me? The way you're touching me? Something dangerous flickered across his face. Would you prefer I stop? The honest answer was no, and we both knew it. I broke eye contact first, frustrated by my own conflicted feelings. Ellie. His voice softened, drawing my gaze back to his. I respect the boundaries you've set. If I've overstepped, tell me. The vulnerability in his tone caught me off guard. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by an elegant woman with silver-streaked dark hair. Alessio, darling, she purred, air kissing his cheeks. It's been too long. Sophia, he greeted her, his demeanor cooling perceptibly. I didn't expect to see you here. Clearly, she replied, her eyes sliding to me with calculated assessment. Aren't you going to introduce me to your protégé? The pause was deliberate, loaded with insinuation. Alessio's expression hardened. Ellie Bennett, Sophia Russo. Sophia's father is an old business associate. I extended my hand, which Sophia took with perfectly manicured fingers. Pleasure, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. How long have you been working for Alessio? A few weeks, I replied, keeping my expression neutral despite the hostility radiating from her. How lovely for you both. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Alessio has always had an eye for emerging talent. The implication was clear, and I felt heat rise to my face. Before I could respond, Alessio placed a possessive hand on my waist. If you'll excuse us, Sophia, he said coldly. We were just discussing a piece I'm considering acquiring. He guided me away without waiting for her response, his body tense beside mine. When we were out of earshot, I glanced up at him. Old girlfriend? I asked, aiming for casual and missing by a mile. His jaw tightened. Ancient history. She doesn't seem to think so. What Sophia thinks ceased to matter to me long ago. He stopped, turning to face me. Don't let her bother you. She's territorial about relationships that no longer exist. The possessive note in his voice stirred something in me, a dangerous flutter of pleasure I immediately tried to suppress. This wasn't a date. It wasn't a relationship. It was business. I needed to remember that. We completed our circuit of the exhibition, but the easy rapport from earlier had vanished. Alessio remained attentive, introducing me to important contacts, but a new tension thrummed between us. I found myself hyper-aware of his proximity, of the weight of his hand at my back, of the subtle cedar and spice scent of his cologne. The drive back to the estate was silent, both of us lost in thought. When the car pulled up to the main entrance, Alessio dismissed the driver with a nod. I'll walk you in, he said, coming around to open my door. The night air was cool against my heated skin as we climbed the steps to the main entrance. Inside, the house was quiet, the staff either asleep or discreetly absent. Thank you for tonight, I said as we reached my door. It was educational. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Is that your professional assessment? What would you prefer I say? The question came out more challenging than I'd intended. His expression turned serious. I'd prefer honesty, Ellie. Always. Honestly? I took a deep breath. I don't know what this is. The job is real. I can see that. But there's more happening here, and pretending otherwise feels dishonest. He studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached out and traced a finger along my jawline, a touch so light it was barely there. There is more, he admitted, his voice low. But it's your move, Ellie. It has been from the beginning. Before I could process his words, he leaned in and pressed a kiss to my forehead, chaste, yet somehow more intimate than a more passionate gesture would have been. Good night, he said softly, before turning and walking away down the corridor, leaving me staring after him with my heart hammering in my chest. Morning found me in the gallery, seeking refuge in work rather than examining the confusing emotions Alessio had stirred in me. My father's paintings watched as I methodically catalogued, photographed, and researched, losing myself in the familiar rhythm. You're avoiding me. I startled at Alessio's voice, nearly dropping the tablet I'd been using. He stood in the doorway, dressed casually in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that somehow looked as expensive as his suits. I'm working, I corrected, striving for a professional tone. He crossed the room with that fluid grace, stopping closer than strictly necessary. We should talk about last night. There's nothing to talk about. I returned my attention to the tablet, though the screen had gone blurry. We attended an exhibition. You made your position clear. Did I? He reached out, gently taking the tablet from my hands and setting it aside, because I thought I left the next move to you. I finally met his gaze, finding none of the manipulation or calculation I'd expected. Instead, his dark eyes held something that looked remarkably like vulnerability. Why me? I asked, the question that had plagued me since that first night at Bellissimo. Of all the people you could have pursued, why a waitress with student debt and a complicated history with your art collection? His expression softened. Because you see me, Ellie. Not the reputation, not the wealth, not the power. The night you returned my ring, you looked me in the eye without fear or greed or calculation. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Your world seems very complicated. It is. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. Some truths were better left unspoken. What do you want from me, Alessio? I asked quietly. Really? He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Everything you're willing to give, nothing you're not. His hand came up to cup my cheek, and this time I didn't pull away. His touch was gentle, at odds with the intensity in his eyes. And if I'm not willing to give anything beyond a professional relationship? I challenged, even as I leaned subtly into his touch. Then that's what we'll have. His thumb brushed across my bottom lip. Though I think we both know that's not true. The tension between us was electric, his face inches from mine. I should have stepped back, maintained the boundaries I'd so carefully established. Instead, I closed the distance between us, pressing my lips to his in a kiss that started tentative, but quickly deepened into something hungry and desperate. His arms encircled me, pulling me against him as the kiss intensified. I wound my fingers into his hair, abandoning the last of my reservations as desire coursed through me. This was reckless, possibly dangerous, but in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. We broke apart, both breathing heavily. Alessio rested his forehead against mine, his hands still at my waist. Tell me to stop, he murmured. Tell me this isn't what you want. I couldn't. The truth was written in my racing pulse, my flushed cheeks, the way my body curved toward his. I can't, I admitted. But this complicates things. His laugh was soft against my skin. Life is complications, Ellie. The question is which ones are worth navigating. Before I could respond, a discreet cough from the doorway made us spring apart. Mrs. Russo stood there, her expression carefully neutral. Pardon the interruption, sir, she said, addressing Alessio. Mr. Ricci has arrived for your meeting. Alessio's demeanor shifted instantly, the warmth in his eyes replaced by cool professionalism. Tell him I'll be there shortly, Mrs. Russo nodded and withdrew, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. Business, Alessio said, with a resigned sigh. We'll continue this conversation later? It was phrased as a question, giving me an out if I wanted it. I nodded, still trying to process what had just happened, what I'd just initiated. He brushed a final, feather-light kiss against my lips before turning to leave. At the doorway, he paused. Ellie, he said, not turning around. Stay in the main house today. Don't go into the West Wing, regardless of what you might hear. The instruction was odd enough to cut through my emotional haze. Why? What's happening? Just a business meeting, he replied, but something in his tone made me doubt the casualness of his words. I'll find you when it's over. With that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my turbulent thoughts and a new, unsettling anxiety. Whatever Alessio's business entailed, the warning suggested it wasn't entirely legitimate. I tried to return to work, but concentration eluded me. My mind kept returning to that kiss, to the feel of his hands on my waist, to the hint of danger that seemed to cling to him like a shadow. What was I doing? Getting involved with my employer was unprofessional enough, but when that employer was Alessio Vitale, a man whose reputation included whispers of criminal connections, It was potentially disastrous. Voices drifted from deeper in the house, male voices raised in what sounded like heated discussion. Despite Alessio's warning, I found myself moving toward the source, curiosity overriding caution. The voices led me to a corridor I recognized as the boundary of the West Wing, Alessio's private domain. I hesitated at the security door, which stood slightly ajar, unusual given the typical restrictions. Through the gap, I could make out Alessio's voice, cool and controlled, despite the tension evident in his words. That wasn't our arrangement, Antonio. The terms were clear. Circumstances change, replied a gravelly voice I didn't recognize. The price has gone up. We don't renegotiate after agreements are made. Alessio's tone hardened. It sets a bad precedent, and refusing to be flexible sets a different kind of precedent, a pause. One that might be costly for both of us. I edged closer to the door, straining to hear. The conversation confirmed my worst suspicions about Alessio's business dealings, and yet I couldn't bring myself to walk away. Are you threatening me, Antonio? Alessio asked, his voice deadly quiet. I'm reminding you how things work. No one is untouchable, not even Alessio Vitale. A tense silence followed, broken by the sound of footsteps approaching the door. I backed away quickly, heart pounding, but not before catching a glimpse of the scene beyond. Alessio standing with his back to the door, facing an older man whose expensive suit couldn't disguise the hardness in his eyes. Two large men flanked him, their stances suggesting concealed weapons. I retreated to the safety of the main gallery, pulse racing. What had I just witnessed? A business dispute, certainly, but one with undercurrents of violence that couldn't be ignored. This was the reality of Alessio's world. The dangerous edge beneath the cultured veneer. Hours passed with no sign of Alessio. I moved restlessly through the house, unable to focus, torn between confronting him about what I'd overheard and pretending ignorance. By evening, I'd made a decision. Whatever was happening between us, whatever feelings had been ignited, I couldn't ignore the realities of who he was. I was packing an overnight bag, intending to return to my apartment to clear my head, when a soft knock came at my door. I opened it to find Alessio standing there, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. You're leaving, he said, noticing the bag on my bed. It wasn't a question. Just for tonight, I replied, though we both knew it might be longer. I need to think. He nodded, unsurprised. You overheard my meeting with Ricci. I did, I admitted, seeing no point in denial. Despite your warning to stay away. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You don't take direction well. I should have expected that. Who is he? I asked, needing to hear the truth from him, whatever it might be. Alessio sighed, running a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomposure. A business associate with unrealistic expectations, nothing that concerns you. It does concern me if I hesitated, unsure how to define what was happening between us. If we're involved. His eyes met mine, serious and intent. My business dealings are separate from my personal life, Ellie. They always have been. But they're part of who you are, I countered. And I need to know exactly who I'm getting involved with. He was silent for a long moment, considering. Then he gestured to the sitting area of my suite. May I? I nodded, and he took a seat, waiting for me to join him. When I did, he began speaking, his voice low and measured. My family has been in business in this city for 3 generations. Some of that business is perfectly legitimate. Real estate, art dealing, investments, some of it operates in gray areas. I inherited both sides when my father died. Criminal enterprises, I clarified, needing him to be direct. He didn't flinch from the accusation. By some definitions, yes, I've spent the last decade steering everything toward legitimate channels. But the transition isn't instantaneous. Certain relationships, certain obligations, remain. Like Antonio Ricci? Like Ricci, he acknowledged. A remnant of my father's era, one I'm working to disentangle from. I processed this, trying to reconcile the man before me, cultured, thoughtful, capable of genuine vulnerability, with the cold-voiced businessman I'd overheard. Implicit threats hanging in the air. The night we met, I said slowly. When you left your ring in the check folder. Was that really just because I noticed you differently? His expression softened. Yes and no. I'd been aware of you for weeks, the waitress who moved with quiet grace, who observed everything but revealed nothing. He paused. When I discovered your connection to the Bennett paintings in my collection, my interest deepened. It felt like fate. You don't strike me as someone who believes in fate, I said skeptically. I believe in recognizing opportunities when they present themselves. He leaned forward, his eyes intent on mine. Meeting you was an opportunity, Ellie. One I didn't intend to waste. The honesty in his voice was disarming. And now? What do you want now? Now? He reached for my hand, his touch gentle but insistent. Now I want you to stay, to give us a chance, despite the complications, despite who I am and what you think you know about me. I looked down at our joined hands, at the signet ring that had started everything. I'm afraid, I admitted. Of me? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Of feeling this way about someone like you. I met his gaze directly, of what that says about me. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You think loving me would make you complicit in whatever you imagine I do. The word loving hung in the air between us, neither of us ready to claim or deny it. Wouldn't it? I asked softly. He considered this, thumb tracing patterns across my palm. I think, he said finally, that we are all more than the sum of our worst actions. I've done things I'm not proud of, Ellie. Made choices driven by necessity rather than morality, but I'm also capable of change, of being better, for the right reasons. And I'm supposed to be that reason. The responsibility felt overwhelming. No, he replied firmly. I've been changing my world since before I met you. But you make me want to accelerate that process. He squeezed my hand gently. Stay. Not forever, if you're not ready for that commitment, just tonight. Let me show you that there's more to me, to us, than what you fear. I hesitated, balanced on the knife edge of decision. The sensible choice was to leave, to extract myself from this complex web I'd stumbled into. But something deeper than sense was guiding me now, something that recognized in Alessio a kindred spirit, a soul similarly marked by loss, and the determination to forge something meaningful from it. One night, I agreed finally, and tomorrow we talk, honestly, completely, about what happens next. Relief washed over his features, followed by something that looked remarkably like joy. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my palm. One night, he promised. Though I intend to convince you to stay for many more. And in that moment, looking into his dark eyes filled with a warmth I'd once thought him incapable of, I knew that I wanted to be convinced. Whatever dangers Alessio's world held, whatever complications lay ahead, the possibility of loving him, of being loved by him, was worth the risk. 6 months later, I stood in the private gallery, making final adjustments to the lighting for the evening's exhibition. My father's paintings held the place of honor, including the final piece that had once been thought lost. The exhibition catalog bore my name as curator, my first official project since accepting the permanent position as director of the Vitale collection. Perfect, came Alessio's voice from behind me. I turned to find him watching me with the same intensity that had captivated me from the beginning, though now it was tempered with an openness that still surprised me. He crossed to where I stood, sliding an arm around my waist with the easy familiarity that had developed between us. Are you ready for tonight? I nodded, leaning into his embrace. The guest list is confirmed, the catering is arranged, and the collection has never looked better. Though I'm still not sure why you insisted on including the signet ring in the display. He smiled, pressing a kiss to my temple. Because it's where our story began, the moment that changed everything. I glanced down at my left hand, where that same ring now rested, resized to fit me, a symbol of the commitment we'd made to each other just a month earlier. Not a traditional engagement ring, but something more meaningful for us both. Who would have thought, I mused, that returning a lost ring would lead to all this? Alessio's smile deepened, a hint of that old secretive expression returning. It wasn't lost, Ellie. I told you the first night. Nothing happens by accident in my world. I laughed, no longer unsettled by his calculated approach to life. So you planned all of this? The job? The relationship? The ring coming back to me in a different form? Let's say I created the opportunity, he replied, turning me to face him fully. But what happened afterward? That was entirely up to you. His expression grew serious. It still is. Every day. And it was true. The transition in his business dealings had continued, accelerating with our relationship. The gray areas were gradually being eliminated. The questionable associates like Ricci phased out. It wasn't a perfect transformation. Nothing in life ever was. But it was genuine progress, born of Alessio's desire to build a future he didn't have to protect me from. I love you, I said simply, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw, complications and all. His eyes darkened with emotion as he drew me closer. And I love you, Ellie Bennett. More than any painting, any business, any empire I've built. As his lips met mine, I marveled at how completely my life had changed in the space of 6 months. From exhausted waitress to gallery director, from solitary existence to partnership with a man as complex and challenging as any artwork in his collection. The ring on my finger caught the light as I wound my arms around his neck, the symbol of a bond that had begun with calculation, but transformed into something neither of us had expected, something real, enduring, and worth every risk we'd taken to find it.